They put me out before the sun rose. There was no shouting, no torches, no moment where my mate, the man I had taken the bond mark with, under 3 witnesses and a moon, looked me in the eye and said the words. He did not need to. He had a new woman on his arm and a tired expression, and the elders had already been told what to write down. I walked out of the gate of Greycombe Pack at the hour when the watchfires were lowest. I had a wool cloak that was not mine, a half-loaf of yesterday's bread, and a pair of boots I had laced wrong because my hands had been shaking. No one looked back. No one looked at me at all. The bond went thin inside my chest before I had walked an hour. A bond does not break cleanly when one wolf rejects it. It goes thin, like a thread pulled to its last fibre, and then it just stops humming. I sat down in wet grass beside a fence post and waited to see if I would die from it. The thread snapped. I did not. I got up and kept walking. That was 8 months ago, and what I am about to tell you about is the night the king's trackers came for me. I should explain what I had been doing in the meantime, because if I tell this story without the in-between, you will think I had been waiting for a rescue. I had not. I walked 4 days down the river road and ended up in a logging village called Tarn Hollow. I told the baker my name was Wren, which it was, and that I had come from a pack that did not want me anymore, which was also true, and she said she could use a second pair of hands at the dough trough. For 2 months I shaped loaves and learned the trick of judging the heat of an oven by the back of my wrist, and slept dreamlessly under a roof that did not belong to anyone who had promised to love me. I am 23 years old, and I had thought my life was going to be loud. I found the quiet was not the worst thing. In the 3rd month, I noticed. I had not bled since before the gate closed behind me. I told myself it was the walking, the cold, the shock of the bond going thin. I told myself for 6 more weeks. Then one morning, I bent to pull the heavy iron tray from the lower oven and felt the small, unmistakable shift of something that was not me, inside me, settling against the curve of itself. And I sat down on the bakery floor with flour on my hands and laughed once, very quietly, and then did not laugh. He had cast me out before the sun rose. He had not known. I had not known either until that morning. So that was what I had been doing, baking bread, counting weeks. I had begun the careful, terrified arithmetic of a woman who would have a child by midwinter and no name to give the village registrar. And I had decided, in the small, clear voice I had begun trusting more than any other voice in my head, that I would manage. I had been managing. It was an evening in late autumn, the kind where the wind comes down off the high passes and tells you exactly what kind of winter you are about to have. I was closing the bakery. I had wiped the trough and was lifting the bar across the door when I heard hooves on the cobbles outside. War horses, more than one. A knock came on the door. 3 measured strikes. "We mean you no harm," a voice said through the wood. A man's voice, low and careful. The kind of careful that has been trained into someone for whom a wrong tone could start a war. "We are riders from the Iron Court. We seek a woman named Wren, who left Greycombe Pack in the spring." The bar slipped half an inch in my hands. The Iron Court. That was Halvar's court. Halvar of the Northern Reach, who held the wolf throne, whom I had never seen and had no reason to think had ever heard my name. I set the bar down. I opened the door 6 inches. 3 men, cloaked, armed, road-stained. The one who had spoken stood a respectful pace back from the threshold, with his hands open at his sides. Older than I expected, grey at the temples, eyes that did not miss anything. My name is Bronn. I am the king's first tracker. We have been looking for you since the snow melted. I was thinking very fast about doors out the back of the bakery and whether I could make the tree line before war horses caught me, which was no. I was also thinking about the small life inside me and what running would cost it. "Why?" I said. Bronn's eyes flicked, just once, down toward where my apron strings tied above the place I had been protecting for 8 months without admitting to anyone that I was protecting it. He did not look long. His face did something that was not pity and was not relief, but was close to both. "The king requests the honour of your audience and the protection of his court for as long as you will accept it. He has reason to believe you may be in danger from a party other than ours." "What party?" "Your former mate's pack has just learned what you carry. They left Greycombe 2 days ago. They are not coming to ask you anything." The wind came down the lane and went through my cloak as if my cloak was not there. "Why does the king care?" Bronn looked at me the way a man looks at someone he has been told a great deal about and is now meeting, and is finding the description was accurate and incomplete. That is a question for him. I packed my things in the time it took the baker's apprentice to saddle a 4th horse. I left a copper for every loaf I had eaten, and a note that said I was sorry, and that she had been kind, which she had been. I rode north with 3 of the king's men through the first true cold of the year. We rode for 4 days. His fortress sat above a black lake at the foot of the Iron Mountains, all stone and slate and old grey timber. I had grown up hearing about him, Halvar of the Northern Reach, who had taken the throne at 26 after the old king died without an heir, who had not chosen a Luna in the 7 years since, who had buried his first wife and her unborn child in a private grave 4 winters ago, and stopped speaking of it after. Songs about the wife had been quietly forbidden in his halls. The rest was rumour. We came through the inner gate at sunset. There were people in the courtyard who stopped what they were doing when they saw me, and I felt their attention as a physical pressure. A man came down the great stair to meet us. I want to be careful about how I describe him, because I want you to understand him the way I understood him in that first moment. He was tall, he was tired, and he was looking at me as if he had been told to expect a stranger, and had instead met someone he already knew. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom of the stair. He did not come closer. "Lady Wren," he said. His voice was lower than I had imagined, and quieter. "You are welcome in the Iron Court. You are not summoned. You are guest. You may leave at any hour you choose. There is a horse in the lower stable, and a purse of silver in the steward's keeping, that are yours if you decide tomorrow that you would prefer the road." I had expected a king's first words to me to be about himself or the politics of the situation. They were not. They were a list of how I could leave. "Why am I here?" I said. "Because you would not be safe anywhere else tonight," he said. And because... He stopped. He had been about to say something else. He chose not to. Because the rest is a longer conversation than you should have to have on horseback in the cold. I came down off the horse. I did not let him help me. He noticed that I did not let him help me, and his face did something I could not name and was not allowed to have an opinion about yet. He took me to the steward, who took me to a chamber in the western tower with a fire already laid and warm bread waiting on the table. There was, on the small table by the bed, a small carved wooden wolf, no larger than my thumb. The grain had darkened with handling. It had been polished by a thumb running over the back of its head many times for years. I picked it up. I held it in my palm. I knew only that it had been left for me deliberately, and that the man who had set it there had set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that has mattered to you for a long time. I went to bed in a stranger's tower and slept for 14 hours. He sent for me the next morning by way of a written note in his own hand, asking, not requiring, whether I would take breakfast with him in his private hall. The handwriting was slanting and careful. I went. He stood when I came in. He gestured to a chair across the small table from his own. There was no one else in the room. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "I would like to give it now, if you will hear it." "I will hear it." He set both his hands flat on the table in front of him, and I noticed the size of them, and the worn gold of a signet on the smallest finger, and the way his knuckles were not entirely steady. He turned his hands over palm up, as if to say, "Here, this is what I am bringing you." "My wolf woke up 4 months ago," he said. "In a way he has not woken up in 7 years. He told me a woman who was carrying a child of our line had been thrown out of her pack. I did not know your name. I did not know your face. I knew the direction the pull came from, and I knew what it meant, and I sent every tracker I could spare. I am not of your line." He looked at me. Something very careful was happening in his face. "The child you carry is." The fire moved in the grate. I heard it as if from a long distance. "Your former mate is a third cousin of mine, through a grandmother neither of us much remembered. The bond does not care about cousinhood. It cares about blood. The child you are carrying is to my wolf, my child to protect, not as father, as blood, and he has been roaring it at me for 4 months. I looked at this man across the table, whose hand had not entirely stopped shaking, and the woman in the grave, 4 winters ago. His eyes did not leave mine. My wife, and the child she was carrying. Yes. "That is the wolf you are listening to." "That is the wolf I am listening to." I let the silence sit. He let me. He did not fill it. That was the first time I noticed that about him, that he could let silence sit without needing to make it stop. "I am not your wife," I said, finally. "I am not anyone's wife now. I do not know what you want me to be in your house. I want you to be safe in it. I want the child you carry to be born under a roof and into a court that knows what it owes you." He looked down at his hands, then back up. "Whatever else my wolf has decided, I have not asked it of you, and I will not. Ride out my gate in a month, with my silver in your saddle, and you will leave with my blessing, and my men at your back, to the border." I looked at him for a long time. "Halvar," I said, the first time I had used his name. I watched something change in his face when I used it. I pretended I had not noticed the change. "I am very tired. I am going to think about this. I am going to eat your bread first." "Eat my bread first," he agreed. He watched me eat it the way a man watches a fire he has been trying to keep alive for a long time finally catch. If you have made it this far, stay with me. What happens in the days after is the part I still cannot quite explain, and I would rather not explain it to an empty hall. Tap the bell if you want the rest of it. The next part is where things start moving fast. I should tell you about Lady Sigrid now, because she walked into the Great Hall on the third day of my being there and made it clear within 30 seconds that she had expected to be the woman sleeping in the tower I was sleeping in. She was the daughter of an Iron Court advisor named Lord Anselm, and she had been, by general assumption of the court, the woman the king would eventually choose, if he ever chose. She had been waiting 4 years. She came down the hall in green silk, with her hair braided as a Luna braids her hair, and stopped in front of me with a smile that did not reach any part of her face above the mouth. "The bakery girl," she said. "Of course, we have all heard." "Wren, of Greycombe." "Of nowhere now, I understand." She let her eyes rest, briefly and pointedly, on the small swell beneath my dress. "How brave of His Majesty to take in a stray, and such a particular stray." I felt, somewhere 2 rooms away, the sudden focused attention of the king, a thing I should not have been able to feel, and yet did, like a shift of pressure in a closed house. I let none of this show on my face. "It is good of His Majesty," I agreed quietly. "I will try to be worth the trouble." She had wanted me to be sharp in front of the court, so the court would see the bakery girl had a temper. I had been a bond-thrown wife for 8 months, and a baker for 6, and a careful pregnant woman for 3. I was not going to lose my footing to a girl in green silk on day 3. I curtsied the depth a guest curtsies an advisor's daughter. I walked past her. Behind me, very softly, Bronn said, "Well done, my lady," and moved to follow me. That was her first move. Her second was 3 days later, and it was less polite. I had begun, in the small, slow way of a woman finding her feet in a strange house, to learn the keep. I found the kitchens. I found the library. I found, on the 3rd morning, a corridor in the older part of the fortress where no one was working, no fires were lit, and a heavy door at the end stood closed with a fresh iron key still in the lock. If you have ever found a closed door you were not expressly invited to open, you know what I did. I turned the key. I went in. It was a nursery. It had been 4 winters ago, a nursery. There was a cradle of dark wood with carved wolves around its rim. There was a small chair, sized for a child of perhaps 3. There was a window seat with a folded blanket, the wool gone slightly grey with disuse. There were shelves with small wooden toys lined along them, horses, hounds, and along the lowest shelf, a row of small carved wolves. 6 of them, identical to the one beside my bed. The 7th space was empty. I stood there until I understood what the toy on my windowsill meant. He had been carving them all this time, 1 a year. He had taken one off the shelf. He had set it where I would find it. He had not said. I closed the door. I locked it. I put the key back. I walked back to my own chamber and sat on the edge of the bed. And I did not cry, because I had stopped crying easily 8 months ago. But I sat very still, with the small wooden wolf in my closed palm, and let myself understand for the first time the shape of what this man was carrying. I will say this now because I want it on the record. I did not love him at that point. I had known him 3 days. But I understood him, and understanding a man is the long road that ends, sometimes, somewhere else. I understood that he had not chosen me. His wolf had chosen the child. He had made room in his house for the child by making room for the woman who carried the child, because he was a man who had built a nursery once, and lost the small body it had been built for, and he was not going to stand by and let it happen a second time. That was what I knew about him on the 3rd day, and it was enough. I did not tell him I had found the room. I came down to the great hall that evening for the formal supper, the first I had attended, and I sat at the high table at the king's right hand, because Bronn had walked in front of me to it and made it clear, without words, that the seating was not negotiable. Lady Sigrid was further down. She watched me sit. I ate slowly. The king ate not at all. He turned the stem of his cup in his fingers and answered the things people said to him with the smallest possible amount of speech. Once, when a server set a plate near my hand, he reached and moved the plate slightly, turning it so the handle of the small fruit knife was angled toward me rather than toward him. He did this without breaking conversation. He did it the way a man does a thing he does not want anyone to notice him doing. I noticed. The cup at my place was warm. I had not asked for warmed wine. The cup was warm because the kitchen had warmed it, and the kitchen had warmed it because someone had told the kitchen that the lady at the king's right hand would be drinking warmed water, not wine, because she was carrying. He had told them. Without telling me, he had told them. I lifted the cup, and over the rim I caught Lady Sigrid watching me with a face very carefully blank, and I felt the small attentive flare inside my chest that I had not had cause to feel for many months. The deep instinct of a woman who knows she has just been seen by someone who would prefer she be elsewhere. 3 breaths later, the cup hit my tongue, and I knew. The water was wrong. There was a sweetness under the warm, faint, herbal, wrong. And I had baked enough breads and worked enough kitchens to know the smell of night moss. Night moss thins the blood. Night moss, in a woman 3 months along, ends a pregnancy in a long, red night. I set the cup down. I did not swallow. I caught Halvar's eye. I held it. He read my face faster than I have ever been read by anyone. He stood. The hall stopped what it was doing, because the king had stood without explaining himself. "My lady is unwell," he said quietly. The hall will continue. Bronn, with me. And to me, lower. Spit. Now. I spit the mouthful into a cloth he handed me, and I walked out of the hall on his arm, his hand under my elbow, exactly enough contact to steady me, no more. And behind us, the kitchen master was already being asked very quietly who had served the king's guest and why. I did not lose the child. I will tell you that now, because I do not want you to carry it for the rest of this story. I had not swallowed. The healers walked me through the night and made me drink things that tasted like wet bark, and Halvar sat in a chair across the room with his hands flat on his knees and did not speak unless I spoke first. He sat there until dawn. He was still there when I woke. The kitchen girl who had warmed the cup was Lady Sigrid's third cousin. She broke before the noon bell. She named Sigrid. Sigrid named her father. Lord Anselm was put under guard before sunset. That should have been the end of it. It was not. Because by then, my former mate's pack had crossed into the northern reach. They came 2 days later. 12 riders led by Edric himself, my former mate, a man I had not seen since the morning he watched me walk through a gate without saying my name. He came with sword wolves and a writ from a southern packlord claiming I was Greycombe property and the child Greycombe blood and demanding return. I was there. I had insisted. Bronn had argued. Halvar had looked at me once, the kind of look that asks a question, and I had said quietly, "I want him to see my face when you tell him." And Halvar had said to Bronn, "She will be at my right hand. Move." So I was at his right hand when Edric walked in. Edric had gotten thinner. Edric had also gotten the look of a man who had made a calculation and was finding the numbers had begun to argue with him. He bowed to the wolf throne. He read his writ. He used my name like it belonged to him. He did not look at me once. When he was done, Halvar did not stand. "You cast her out," Halvar said. His voice was very quiet. The hall was very quiet. 8 months ago, before the sun rose, with 1 cloak and half a loaf. You did not know what she carried. You did not ask. You did not look. You sent her into a winter you did not expect her to survive. Edric said, "My lord." "You will not call me lord," Halvar said, still quiet. "You will not call me anything. You will stand there until I am done." Edric stood there. The hall did not move. "You signed her out of your pack. By your own laws, she is no longer yours. By the older laws, a woman cast out without cause is the responsibility of the first hearth that takes her in. I took her from Tarn Hollow with her permission. The child she carries is, by my wolf's judgment, kin of my line. You have no claim. You have nothing." He stopped. He looked at Edric. The thing in his face was not anger. It was something colder and older. A king looking at a man who had failed something basic, and being unhurried about saying so. "You will leave by the way you came. You will not return. If a single rider of your pack is seen north of the river road again, I will treat it as a declaration." Then he did the thing that I am still, all this time later, not entirely sure how to describe. He stood up from the wolf throne. He came down off the dais. He stopped 2 paces in front of where I was sitting, so the whole hall could see him, and he turned to face Edric. And he set his hand on the back of my chair, not on me, just on the back of the chair behind my shoulder, claiming the chair, claiming the woman in it, in the smallest gesture possible, in front of every wolf in the room. "This is my lady," he said. "Address her in the future as such, if you address her at all. Now go." Edric went. The hall did not breathe until the doors closed behind him. I turned in my chair and looked up at the man standing behind it. He was not looking at the doors, he was looking down at me. His face was doing the thing it had been trying not to do for a week. "Halvar," I said. "My lady," he said. "You have not asked me." "I know." "I am asking you to ask me." His eyes went very still. He came around the chair. He went down, not all the way, not a knee, but a deep, formal half-bow of the kind the King of the Iron Court does not give to anyone. And he stayed there, eye level with me, and he said, "My lady of Greycombe no more. I have not chosen you. My wolf chose your child. You owe me nothing for that. But I am asking you, in front of my hall, with no claim and no demand. Would you stay, as mine, by your own choosing, for as long as you choose?" "I will stay," I said, "by my own choosing, as long as I choose." He kissed me then, once, briefly, in front of his court. It was not the kind of kiss songs are written about. It was the kind where 2 people agree, in public, that something has been decided. What broke open inside me was not desire. It was the clean feeling of being chosen, with my own consent, by a man who had made it clear I could leave. When he straightened, his hand stayed in mine. The hall began, very slowly, to breathe. The curse. Because of course there was a curse. You cannot bury a Luna and her unborn in the wolf throne's own hall and have nothing left over. Made itself known to me 3 nights later, in the form of a cold I could not get warm from. It had been seeded into the flagstones beneath the dais 4 winters ago by a rival who had been executed since. But old blood magic does not die just because the witch did. It had killed Halvar's first wife, slowly. It woke when a woman of his bloodline carried a child near it, the healers told me. Halvar told me there was a way to lay it, and the way required the woman it had marked to walk the line of it herself, and pour salt and iron over the dais stones, and not flinch when it came up to meet her. He told me he would do it instead. He told me she did not have to. I told him I would do it. I did it at moonrise. The hall had been emptied. Halvar stood at the foot of the dais with the salt and the iron, and I walked the line. The cold came up out of the stones into my bones, the way old grief comes up out of the man's mouth when he has finally let himself open it. Frost bloomed on the back of my hands. My breath went white. The cold reached for the small life inside me, and I felt it reach, and I set my palm flat on the stone of the dais, and I poured the salt with my other hand, and I said, aloud, in my own voice, "You do not get this one." blood came from where my palm had met the iron edge. I did not lift my hand. The cold pushed harder. It pushed for a long moment. I held. It broke. It went out of the stones the way a fever goes out of a child, all at once, with a sound somewhere between a sigh and a snap. And the hall was warm again, and the hearth at the far end caught with a little sudden roar, and my knees went, and Halvar caught me before I hit the dais, and he did not let go for a long time. 6 months later, in a chamber on the south side of the keep, that had been a nursery once, and was a nursery again, I gave birth to a daughter with very dark hair and a temper, and I named her Linnea, after my grandmother. And Halvar did not weep until he was alone in the corridor, and thought I could not hear him. I let him think I could not hear him. Some kindnesses are the kindnesses of pretending. A letter came from Greycombe in the autumn. Edric had been removed. The new pack lord asked permission to send tribute. Halvar wrote back in his own slanting, careful hand that the Iron Court would accept tribute and would remember the difference between packs that recognise a wolf cast out and packs that did not. He showed me the letter. He asked if I wanted to sign. I said no. I had walked out of that pack at a quiet hour with a half-loaf of bread, and I had nothing further to write to them. He folded the letter and sent it without me. The 7th wolf is on the shelf in the nursery now. I put it there myself. One afternoon, when Linnea was sleeping, I took the small carved wolf off my windowsill and carried it down the corridor and set it where it belonged. The shelf is full. The room is no longer waiting. If you have stayed with me to the end of this, I want you to know I never expected to tell this story. I expected to be the woman in the back of a bakery in a logging village, raising a girl and not saying her father's name. I am not that woman. I am the woman at the king's right hand, and the woman whose daughter is asleep down a warm corridor, and the woman who walked a line of cold stones and told the old grief in them, in her own voice, that it did not get this one. Tell me, did you see it coming when they put me out before the sun rose? Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. And if her side of the story is the side you wanted to hear, stay with this channel. There are more of us, on more nights, with more to say. The moon is up. The iron is warm. I am finally home.